Walk through the streets of ancient Israel, and you see a society where civil engineering, agriculture, and sacred rituals constantly collide. Read through the legal code governing the society, specifically Deuteronomy chapter 22, the portion of Teitzei, and it appears to mimic that exact chaos. To a casual reader, it reads like a disjointed catalog of ancient statutes. Looking at the rigid columns of this manuscript, the shifts are jarring. Verse 8 mandates a roof parapet, while verse 9 prohibits mixed seeds. Plowing laws pivot to textile rules, then transition directly into severe family law and criminal defamation. But a sophisticated legal system does not randomize its jurisprudence. There is a structural logic to why civil, agricultural, and criminal codes are stacked directly on top of each other. Classical rabbinic commentators, specifically the 11th century scholar Rashi, reject the premise that these legal sequences are random. They approach the text through the principle of Smichut, or juxtaposition. This is the exegetical rule that adjacent verses comment upon and contextualize one another. Watch this diagram map Rashi's thesis. By applying Smichut, these isolated laws snap into a directional timeline tracking two opposing axes of behavior: the compounding nature of virtuous action and the cascading nature of unchecked malice. Reading Teitzei requires looking past the static legal code to observe an active engine of behavioral cause and effect. We begin tracking the text at verse 8, the mandate to construct a physical parapet or guardrail when building a new house. Look closely at the lettering in this scroll. Rashi, drawing on the Midrash Tanchuma, asks a specific structural question. Why is this building code placed immediately after the ritual command of sending away a mother bird afore taking her eggs? He answers using a governing Talmudic axiom, Mitzvah, Goreret, Mitzvah. One good deed brings another in its train. Fulfilling a minor ethical duty regarding the bird generates merit, resulting in the construction of a new house. This dictates moral responsibility, requiring a parapet to protect human life. This responsible ownership leads to agricultural wealth, vineyards and fields, and ultimately fine garments. Within this legal framework, virtue operates teleologically. A single isolated ethical act serves as the catalyst for systemic structural prosperity. The text then introduces a biological tension. The phrasing at the end of verse 8 mandates the parapet to avoid blood guilt, warning against the scenario where anyone should fall from it. Examining the Hebrew grammar, Rashi and the Sifrei point out that the text literally translates to, "If he that is to fall, falls." The phrasing implies the victim was already destined to fall to his death due to past unpunished crimes. This creates a legal paradox. If the man's death was a matter of divine providence, why is the homeowner assigned legal blood guilt for the missing parapet highlighted here in red? The commentators resolve this using the classical axiom of agency. Merit is brought about through the agency of good men, and liability is executed through the agency of the guilty. Metaphysical destiny provides no defense in Jewish tort law. Human beings remain strictly liable for the physical environments they engineer. The text then juxtaposes this upward momentum with a sharp decline in verse 13. A man takes a wife, cohabits with her, and suddenly takes an aversion to her. Here we see the dark mirror to our previous axiom, Aveirah, Goreret, Aveirah. Transgression brings transgression in its train. We map Rashi's psychological breakdown on this descending chart. The violation begins internally at a single note, hatred. It inevitably materializes into the verbal crime of slander. The cascade terminates in catastrophic, public legal perjury to destroy his wife's life. The court only adjudicates the final, destructive act of perjury, but the structural layout of the text diagnoses the hidden psychological pathology that caused it. We see this matrix of agency and environment applied directly to the criminal statutes of an assaulted betrothed woman later in the chapter. The law examines two identical acts occurring in two distinct geographic contexts. In the first scenario, verses 23 and 24, the assault occurs within the confines of the city. Look at how location alters culpability on this matrix. Rashi draws a legal presumption. The city's proximity assumes an outcry yields rescue. The lack of outcry implies shared culpability, placing a data point here in the city quadrant. The text contrasts this in verses 25 through 27, where the act occurs in the open field. Geographic isolation is linked to the legal definition of murder. The victim cried out, but there was no rescue, zeroing out her agency. Deuteronomic law does not evaluate criminal acts in a vacuum. The physical geometry of the environment dictates the legal thresholds of coercion and complicity. Zooming out, this master diagram combines all three models into a single interlocking system extracted from one chapter of text. The surface reading presented Teitzei as a disjointed index of building codes, farming rules, and family disputes. The reality, revealed through the hermeneutic of Smichut, is a sophisticated, unified behavioral model of human psychology. Every law is a block in a larger structure, illustrating the steady, inevitable accumulation of human actions over time. Rabbinic exegesis presents these laws as a study in momentum. Instead of isolated events, the text focuses on the long-term direction of a person's life. Legal outcomes, whether a fall from a roof or the collapse of a marriage, are the observable results of long, compounding trajectories of human agency.